Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into the enduring enigma of Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, it's one of those mysteries that just, well, never seems to fade away.
Absolutely.
Uh-uh.
We've pulled together a pretty interesting set of original source materials for you. We're talking the famous or infamous Ripper letters,
Mm,
contemporary news reports, what the police were actually doing or trying to do, and of course all the theories about who he might have been.
right. And our goal here for you listening isn't really to solve it. I mean, that's probably impossible at this point.
Yeah, definitely not promising that.
No, it's more about navigating the actual evidence from the time,
Mm.
trying to understand the immediate impact, how people reacted as these horrible events were happening in 1888.
Getting closer to how it felt back then.
Exactly. Like experiencing the mystery unfolding alongside them as much as we can.
Okay, so first up, sources. We've got bits from casebook.org. It's this huge online archive on the case, really detailed.
Oh, yeah, it's indispensable for Ripper research.
Totally. So we'll look at those letters. Dear Boss, Saucy Jackie, the really grim from Hell one, a few others.
Hmm.
Then, background from Wikipedia, setting the scene in Whitechapel, the social conditions.
Which were, let's be honest, appalling.
Truly. And descriptions of the canonical 5 victims, the murder details, plus mentions of other, maybe connected cases.
Right, the less certain ones.
And we'll get into the police side, how they struggled, the investigation's limits.
The pressure they were under must have been immense.
Unbelievable. Then, the suspects list. It's huge, both from back then and newer theories.
It just keeps growing, doesn't it?
It does. There's even a recent DNA angle with a suspect's relative wanting a new inquest.
Though that's quite controversial, the DNA evidence,
We'll touch on that. Plus, an FBI profile from much later, more about the victims' lives.
which are incredibly sad stories.
Yeah. And the wider impact on Victorian society, how it tapped into fears.
Mm-hmm.
And we even peeked at a Reddit thread just to see how people still talk about it.
Huh, okay. So a real mix. It's quite a puzzle. Dark, but fascinating.
Definitely. So let's start with those letters. They're sort of the flashiest part, maybe.
They certainly grab headlines. What's striking is how direct they are, almost taunting.
Yeah. And Dear Boss, received September 88. That's the big one, isn't it? Because of the name.
Precisely. First time Jack the Ripper appears anywhere, as far as we know.
And whether it was really him or like some journalist trying to spice things up.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Either way, that name it just stuck instantly.
It completely defined him, whoever he was. It shows how powerful, branding can be, even in something this grim.
It really does. And it wasn't just the name and Dear Boss. It mentioned clipping an ear.
Right. And then, just after the double murder, Stride and part of Edus's ear was missing. Severed.
Chilling detail. That must have seemed like terrifying proof at the time.
Oh, absolutely. It lent it this awful authenticity. The police even put copies in the papers, didn't they? Hoping someone would recognize the handwriting.
They did. Which really shows you where forensic investigation was back then. Very reliant on the public.
Yeah, pretty basic stuff compared to now.
Then you get the Saucy Jackie postcard just days later.
Okay.
And what makes that one interesting, for the believers anyway, is it mentions the Dear Boss's letter and the double murder.
Before it was widely reported.
Well, possibly before it was in all the papers. It mentions 2 victims. The counter argument is, Whitechapel was tight-knit. Rumors spread like wildfire.
Word of mouth, or maybe an early edition few people saw.
Exactly. So it's hard to know if it proves inside knowledge or just rapid gossip. Separating fact from rumor was tough even then.
Always a challenge. And then, the From Hell letter. Ugh.
Yeah, that one's something else. Sending half a human kidney, preserved.
To George Lusk, head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, the sheer nerve of it.
Yeah.
And the brutality.
Staggering. And the medical exam at the time said it could have been from Edos's missing kidney, but they couldn't be 100% sure.
Still, the act itself,
Mm-hmm.
real or hoax, it just ramped up the terror, didn't it? Fed this image of a totally detached, monstrous killer.
No doubt. And the language in From Hell and Saucy Jackie, crude, boastful. Whether it's a killer or not, that's the persona someone wanted to project.
A very deliberate, terrifying image.
Mm-hmm. The later letters, like the Prince William Street one, the Openshell letter, they came later. Most researchers think they're less likely to be real.
Copies, maybe? Or just people jumping on the bandwagon?
Probably. They often lack the specific details or that same chilling quality of the first few. The September 17th letter, found much later, also very doubtful.
So the main focus is really on Dear Boss, Saucy Jackie, and From Hell.
Generally, yes. They had the biggest impact at the time.
Okay, let's pivot then. Talk about the place. Whitechapel, 1888. The Wikipedia description is bleak.
Bleak is an understatement. You had massive immigration, Irish and Jewish communities flooding in.
Leading to terrible overcrowding, extreme poverty.
The stat about half the kids not making it past 5 years old, it's horrifying.
Just awful. And crime was rampant, robbery, violence, alcohol was everywhere.
And for so many women, prostitution was tragically the only way to get by.
You have to understand this backdrop of just utter desperation and social decay to get the context for the murders.
Absolutely crucial. These weren't crimes happening in a vacuum. They happened in a place that felt like it was already falling apart.
And think about policing that. How do you even begin?
Exactly. That environment, poverty, people constantly moving between lodging houses, often with no real records. It created huge problems for the police.
Identifying victims must have been hard enough.
Let alone finding witnesses or suspects in that transient population. People came and went, tracking anyone. Nearly impossible back then.
Shows the limits of policing before, proper ID systems and databases.
Totally different world.
And the victims of the Canonical Five: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Reading about them, even the short summaries, their individual stories are just heartbreaking.
They really are. Each one facing immense hardship of poverty, alcoholism, broken families sometimes.
Lives marked by vulnerability, which ultimately put them out on those dangerous streets.
Yes. And the details of what happened to them, undeniably gruesome.
The throat cuts, deep and repeated. The abdominal mutilations.
Often extensive. And the removal of organs in several cases. The facial disfigurement, especially with Kelly, the last one.
Just brutal.
Yeah.
It terrified people, obviously, but it also sparked that early idea, didn't it? That the killer knew something about anatomy.
Right. The surgical knowledge theory. Still debated, of course, but it arose directly from those specific horrific injuries. It makes you wonder about the killer's job or skills.
And there are those strange little coincidences, too, like Mary Nichols' body being taken out the back gate of the mortuary.
Which was on Chapman's court.
Right. And then 2 days later, Annie Chapman is murdered practically next door in Hanbury Street, where the same undertaker worked.
It's a grim coincidence, really highlights how geographically concentrated these early murders were, a very small area.
We should also mention those other cases sometimes linked, like the Pinchin Street torso.
And the Whitehall mystery, body parts turning up.
Yeah. They had similar mutilations in some ways, but
Yeah.
also key differences, right? Like the Ripper victims weren't decapitated.
Correct. That's a major difference. And even that murder in New York, Carrie Brown,
People immediately thought Ripper for a bit.
shows the level of fear. Any brutal killing, people jump to that conclusion. But the NYC case was quickly seen as unrelated.
So those other cases, they show the fear, but the Canonical Five seem linked by a very specific pattern.
Yes, the pattern of mutilation, especially the throat slashing and the type of abdominal injuries, strongly suggests one person was responsible for those five, at least. The torso cases are different.
Okay, let's talk about the police investigation itself. The stuff from jacktheripper.org suggests they were just swamped.
Overwhelmed and increasingly desperate, absolutely. Public pressure, media frenzy.
And dealing with 19th century methods in this chaotic part of London.
The point about rewards being useless, even harmful, is really interesting.
Yeah, why was that?
Well, they found offering big money just generated this flood of false leads, people making things up, hoping for cash.
All right, wasting police time.
Hugely. And maybe even burying genuine clues under all the noise. It's a fascinating look at the practical problems they faced.
It really paints a picture of chaos, doesn't it? The public frenzy must have been intense.
Oh, imagine the sheer volume of stuff coming into Scotland Yard. Tips, hoaxes, theories. You can see why the officers felt despair.
One lead after another just fizzling out.
Exactly. Constantly feeling like they were chasing shadows. The pressure must have been incredible.
And we get the names of the key officers. So Sir Charles Warren, Aberline Swanson, later McNaughton.
The names you always see associated with the case.
You have to feel for them, in a way. Carrying that weight under that scrutiny, trying to solve this monster case.
Absolutely. And then you look at the suspects list on Wikipedia. Wow.
It's kind of insane, isn't it? Over 100 names.
It's a who's who, and maybe a who's that, of Victorian London and beyond. The police back then had their own list, of course.
Druitt, Kosminski, Pizer. Those were some of the early ones they looked at closely.
Right. But since then, Authors, researchers, they've added everyone from royalty
Prince Albert Victor, yeah.
to artists like Walter Sickert, even American serial killers like H.H. Holmes, which seems a stretch.
Geographically challenged, maybe. It just shows the lack of hard evidence pointing anywhere specific.
That's the core issue. No smoking gun.
Some of the later theories get pretty wild, too. That Reddit thread we saw.
Oh, yeah. What did they have?
Suggestions like the painter Degas. Someone mentioned a Malaysian cook in Austin, Texas, bizarrely.
Okay, that's creative.
And someone jokingly threw in Laszlo Cravensworth, the vampire from What We Do in the Shadows.
Huh. Well, that tells you something about how the case has entered pop culture, right? It's almost become fictional.
It has. But the sheer number of suspects just underlines that central problem. No proof.
Exactly. The police at the time tended to think it was someone local, someone who knew Whitechapel's alleys and escape routes really well.
Which makes sense for evading capture.
It does, and theories still pop up. Like, just last year, a historian suggested a police officer might have been the Ripper.
Still adding to the list, even now.
Which brings us to the DNA idea. That's a more modern twist.
Right, the relative of Aaron Kosminski, one of the original police suspects, pushing for a new inquest.
Based on DNA supposedly found on a shawl linked to Catherine Eddowes.
But as the article notes, the science behind that claim is shaky.
Very shaky. The methodology used has been heavily questioned by scientists. Contamination of a 130-year-old shawl is a huge issue.
Handled by who knows how many people over the years.
Exactly. And they were looking at mitochondrial DNA, which has limitations for identification. Plus, the research wasn't peer-reviewed or published in a proper journal.
So lots of red flags. A previous request for an inquest was already denied.
Right. It highlights how tricky it is applying modern tech to old, potentially compromised evidence. The idea is exciting, but the science needs to be solid.
Yeah, gotta be cautious. Okay, shifting gears slightly, what about the psychology, the profiling angle?
Yeah, the FBI's John Douglas did an analysis looking back at the case. It offers a potential profile.
What does it suggest?
Someone who likely felt different, maybe a physical or mental issue, probably had a solitary job, seemed quiet.
But hiding aggression.
Deep aggression, yes. And no remorse. Likely unmarried or maybe a brief marriage to an older woman. Primary contact with women. Prostitutes.
Interesting. What about family background?
The profile suggests potentially a domineering mother, maybe issues with alcohol, and a weaker father figure.
Of course, profiling a historical case is speculative, right?
Hugely speculative. It's not an exact science, especially with so little concrete info about the killer. But it offers a framework, maybe, for the type of person.
And some parts of that profile do seem to fit descriptions of some suspects over the years.
They do. And Douglas talks about lust murder, the idea that the mutilations were about power and domination, not necessarily sexual gratification in the typical sense. That's a key part of his perspective.
Okay, let's widen out again. The impact on society at the time. Victorian culture and society touches on this.
It wasn't just fear in the East End. It sent shockwaves everywhere.
Tapped into existing class fears, right? Fear of the dangerous working class.
Definitely. But also this unsettling idea. What if it was someone from the upper classes? That was whispered about, too.
And sadly, it fueled anti-Semitism in some quarters.
Yes. Tragically, the atmosphere of fear and suspicion made things worse for the Jewish community in the area.
But there's also this idea that, weirdly, it might have created a kind of national unity. Shared fear and outrage.
That's one argument. Perhaps more importantly, though, the intense focus on the Ripper did shine a harsh light on just how awful conditions were in the East End.
Yeah, the media coverage, however sensational, forced people to look at the poverty and despair.
Exactly. The graphic details, the victim stories, it highlighted the rot, as they called it, maybe more effectively than any official report ever could.
That Reddit thread we mentioned also brought up the idea that it's maybe just unsolvable now.
Yeah. How so?
Someone quoted the end of the From Hell graphic novel.
Yeah.
Basically saying there's been so much speculation, so many theories layered on top of each other.
That the truth is buried too deep.
Pretty much. That the mystery itself has kind of taken over.
That rings true. The creation of Jack the Ripper, the boogeyman, has become this huge cultural thing.
Maybe overshadowing the actual victims.
I think it certainly risks doing that. The myth becomes bigger than the reality.
So, wrapping this deep dive up, we've covered a lot. The horrific crimes, the chaotic investigation, the social backdrop, and how this whole morbid fascination began and just never stopped.
Yeah. Those letters, real or not, they definitely fueled it and gave us the name. The police faced an almost impossible task with the tools they had.
And that list of suspects just keeps reminding us There's no single solid piece of proof.
So for you, listening, hopefully this has given you a structured way into this really complex piece of history, looking at it through different
The
sources.
aha moments maybe
Yeah.
come from seeing how the letters, the crime scenes, the social reactions, how they all connect or seem to.
Mm-hmm. And some details really stick with you, don't they?
Oh, yeah. The Jolly Bonnet comment in one letter. That
Ah.
kidney in the mail. The Golston Street graffito message.
The stark post-mortem details.
Just the sheer range of suspect theories.
Yeah.
From plausible to completely outlandish.
And looking at this case, you learn a lot about, well, the history of investigations, forensics,
The power of the media, public perception.
and our enduring, maybe slightly weird fascination with unsolved mysteries and the dark side of things.
And it's definitely a stark reminder of Victorian inequality and vulnerability.
Absolutely.
So here's a final thought, something for you to mull over after we finish.
Okay.
With all the speculation, the lack of proof, the way the myth of Jack the Ripper has grown, is his actual identity even the most important thing anymore? Or has the cultural impact, the historical footprint of the mystery itself, become more significant?
And maybe more importantly, in creating this larger-than-life villain, have we kind of lost sight of the real women, Marianne, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane, and their actual tragic stories?
Yeah. Has the boogeyman overshadowed the victims? Something to think about.